everyone, welcome back to All Sunny Farms. My name is Grayson, and today it is a average warm day. Today it is actually around, say, about 70 degrees, and today it has been raining all day. So, as we all know it, we couldn't do any bees today. Earlier today, it was somewhat warm and we weren't able to do anything because right whenever I went out to BR to do video, it rained. So, today we're going to be here in the studio, and today I have a big topic. I want to talk a little bit about the art of raising queens and why you should start raising queens. Now, a lot of beekeepers all over the world hesitate to start raising queens, and I don't think you should. And really, when we go about the art of anything, whether it be art of beekeeping or, making art or art of raising queens, it's skills. It takes skills to be able to, do art, whether it be the art of beekeeping or the art of raising queens. And the art of raising queens, to me, and this is just me, and if you can go look in the dictionary and see what art means, and I think whenever you do get into raising queens, it always takes time. I've always speaked on that before, that it always takes time to get better at something, especially queen rearing. Why? Because queen rearing is a art. And yes, it is art. Beekeeping is art. And I always speech or whatever that it always takes a little bit to be able to do something, whether it be beekeeping or raising queens, which is in the realm of, beekeeping. And beekeepers always raise queens, and everybody speaks on raising queens. And today I want to talk a little bit about the art of raising queens, along with a couple tips, I would say, to starting queen rearing, and a lot of more, so stay tuned. So as we mentioned earlier, art is a skill. And what I mean by that, let's go in a little bit more depth here. And what I mean by skill, and this is in beekeeping too, it isn't just in raising queens. I've kept bees for about 7 years, and I'm going to say it for me, and for some beekeepers it may not be the same, but I've kept bees for about 7 to 8 years, around there, and I've had a lot of experience hands-on. You can read whatever you want on books, and that's good too, or online, or wherever you want to learn about raising queens, but you can read and see pictures all you want, but you have to have all that hands-on experience to be able to do it to the highest level, right? As you see a lot of times, like Bob Beanie or some of these other large beekeepers, Chris Werner, who raise a big pack of queens, a big high level of queens. They've been doing this for a long time. And what I see a lot of beekeepers do whenever they start getting into queen rearing, and I do 100% say I think it is important to be able to do some other things and get into queen rearing. To anybody who's thinking about raising queens, go on and get into it. Don't hesitate. But what a lot of beekeepers don't see or realize about raising queens, it does take time, and it does take time to be successful at what you're doing, whether it be grafting or making your cells, which goes back to grafting, of course. And I see one of the biggest problems for beekeepers is grafting. Now, everything else, making a cell starter or cell finisher or some of these other methods we'll talk about in the future, getting into more of the queen rearing era and the realm of rearing queens. And I think rearing queens is a good way to do whatever you need, whether it be trying to make queens for splits or replace queens in hives that the queens are getting a little bit too old and you need to replace them, or maybe you want to sell them or whatever. And we'll talk a little bit about business-wise of queen rearing, and that also goes into the art of queen rearing. There's a lot of different things that go into raising queens, and I think one of the biggest ones, I think, is to stick with it for a while and be able to stick with it, like I said, and be able to build up on what you have read or what you watch online or whatever, and build that with hands-on experience, and then start growing. And you will grow eventually. I know a lot of times beekeepers will be frustrated and saddened by maybe they didn't have a good take on their grafts, and I've been there too. There's times where I get maybe a 50-50 chance on getting a 50% chance of a good batch of grafts. But what you do need to realize, and I think every beekeeper does, and what they a lot of times don't realize, it takes time and precision to get to that certain level that you want to be at. It doesn't happen overnight. And I've thought about this all the time whenever I start getting into the realm of thinking, hey, I should start raising queens because that's a good idea. And I watch videos all the time on raising queens. But what you don't need to get into your mindset is that it's going to be easy. Because it isn't going to be easy. I'm going to say that right now. Beekeeping isn't easy, nor is raising queens going to be easy. But one of the things that you do need to realize is to be successful, and we've talked about being successful, to be successful at something, whether it be raising queens or anything else in life, it does take a little bit of time and skill at it. A lot of these other beekeepers who do it have been keeping bees for maybe 20 years. And that's how they gain that experience from other beekeepers hands-on. And that will happen to you. Once you get more into queen rearing and start grafting more and be able to do more with your queens and get a little bit more hands-on experience and more information, or maybe you can result to more beekeepers and learn a little bit more on hands-on learning, and that helps out too to get a little bit more experience and a little bit more of an idea on what it takes to raise queens. Now, what I'm saying here, and a lot of beekeepers don't realize also, is that I'm not saying that don't learn from books. I'm also not saying that you don't want to learn from online. But sometimes beekeepers think that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do is read a book, maybe do a couple things online and you're done. But that's not really the whole case to it. You know why? Because a lot of times whenever beekeepers don't succeed at something, they quit at it. And, you know, when they go out, maybe do some grafts, a lot of new beekeepers, or maybe even beekeepers who start, you know, their 5th year in beekeeping and start raising queens, they, do a batch or whatever, and maybe they do 10, maybe they do 20, maybe they overdo it and maybe do 30, and then they go back maybe 48 hours later and see that there has nothing happened. It didn't go well. And that kind of disappoints them, and that is frustrating to a lot of beekeepers. And what that does is that puts them down. They go back into their house and sit down. Well, I'm not successful, I should quit beekeeping because I'm not successful. And I don't think beekeepers should do that. I think that is a bad habit or a bad mindset to have for anybody to think like that. So if you are in this frustrating time where you are undergoing this nuisance or maybe this type of frustration in your bees that's not going correctly that you wanted to go, just think that I need to do this a little bit more. I need to keep going along with it, but before I know it, I'll be to a certain point where I will start being successful, because if you do that, you will be successful. Just give it time and give it patience and you'll be there. Alright, since we've talked a little bit about the art of raising queens and what it takes to raise queens, and like I said before, it does take time and it does take patience, because a lot of beekeepers don't have that patience. But anyway, since we've already covered that, I want to get into a little bit of a couple tips and different things that you do want to do whenever you start getting into raising queens. Now, number one, I think this is really simple, and I'll explain it to you a little bit here. We'll talk a little bit about methods in the future. Maybe we'll talk about a method here or two once we get more into this video. But first, I think whenever you start trying to raise queens, or you want to get into that kind of realm of doing that, whatever you may do it for, and number one, whenever you get into queen rearing, do it slow and just do about, I'd say about 7 to 10 grafts and expect about 5. Why do you want to expect just 5? Because a lot of times whenever you do your first grafts, you're not always going to get that good rating or that good percentage take that you would like. But like I said, it takes time. So just give it time and you'll get to a point where you get a better percentage range, a take. Whether it be a 7 out of 10 or maybe even a 10 out of 10, you'll get there. But just expect 5 for your first go-rounder. Maybe just expect 2 for your go-rounder, because this is your first graft. Let's just say you're getting into queen rearing, you got all of your equipment, and you gotta start off somewhere. So first, start out with a plan. Start out with a plan what you need to do with your queens. Don't, start without a plan. You just gotta be able to go through some things before you start messing with your hives and doing some different things. And that's what I suggest. Number one, you also do gotta understand how a queen is raised and how many days it does take. A queen will hatch about day 16, so you gotta be able to figure out which days you need to take her out. And I'm going to try to explain this very simple, but if you want to have some other videos. There are a lot of other videos taking this, so there might be some other better videos covering this topic, but I'll just go on and explain it here. So like I said, you do gotta understand of how bees do raise a queen. I have a video talking about how bees raise a queen, but most times whenever a queen is raised, it is in the case of swarming, superseding the queen, or an emergency queen cell. And in the case of raising queens, it's most likely the type of cell they're going to raise is a emergency queen cell, because you make up a starter, right? And then that full packed starter, or whether it be a starter slash finisher, or whatever you do, whatever method you do use, right? That hive will be queenless because you're taking the queen out immediately. So that's going to be a emergency queen cell. I've also talked about doing different ways, being able to notice the difference from a swarm cell or emergency cell. And this isn't what it's about. I'm just mentioning some different videos to be able to better understand some of these different things. I go into more depth in those videos. I'll try to go in depth in this video here because this is important information I think a beekeeper should look into whenever you are thinking about starting to raise queens. So number one, you do need to understand, like I said before, the queen cycle on how the bees raise a queen. So from day one, they'll take about a 3-day-old larva, right? Maybe even 2-day-old larva, somewhere around there. About the 3-day mark is whenever the egg forms into a larva. It's a very small larva. And it's really easy to look on the eye. It's not an egg, because the egg's impossible. I wouldn't say impossible, but it's just not, you don't want to use an egg. But you want to use a 3-day-old larva. But what a lot of beekeepers do, and this is something that isn't really good, and I've seen it before, and I know how easier it is to scoop up the bigger larva. So sometimes they'll use about 5 to 6, maybe even 7-day-old larva instead of that 3-day-old larva. Why is this bad? Because the about 3-day-old larva is a little bit better, and we have a longer duration of the royal jelly that the bees feed that larva, right? They have a longer duration. But if you use a 5-day-old larva, then that larva doesn't have that more of a length of how long the bees feed of royal jelly. So that's why a younger larva is better than an older larva. Will there be a difference? There could be, and there might really be one. So if you're going to try to sell queens, the best way to have a good quality queen is go for a 3-day-old larva. If that's the way you want to do it, you graft it out, you put those little larvae in your cup, and what the bees do on the frame is they'll pick the 3-day-old larva, but whenever you're grafting it, you gotta pick it. But that's why a lot of times the bees are the ones who are able to know what they're doing, right? The bees are smarter than us. They know more about what they need for raising queens, and sometimes the bees are a little bit better. But when we're wanting to raise queens, we have to be able to know what kind of larva we need, and that is a 3-day-old larva, and they are small larvae. And you can't really say for sure which one is which, but you just want the smallest larva you can find and graft her out, or graft the larva out and put that larva in the cell. Then, you have a pretty good larva. So, really the cycle when you get into the queen, it goes to a larva on about day 3 to 9. Then it goes into a pupa to about, today, I would say 10 to 15. And then after that, they hatch out on day 16. So, on about day 14/15, they are still pupating. But on day 16, they're done pupating and they hatch out of the cell or your graft. And that's whenever they are ready. So that's basic cycle. I'll put up a chart here and you'll be able to see the basic form. It isn't hard. It isn't something that's a very hard thing to understand, but you just got to be able to know that, so then you know when you need to take your cells out whenever you do start getting more queen cells on your starter slash finisher, whether it be your finisher. And I think that's very important for you guys to be able to understand if you're going to be trying to get into queen rearing. And it's definitely something that you do need to look into before you start raising queens, so you know the cycle. But most beekeepers should know this, right? Every beekeeper should know this. And the reason why I'm saying this is because this is basic beekeeping knowledge here. But I'm just saying, if you are going to be getting into queen rearing, even though you already know it, you're like, oh, I don't know it, I don't need to go back over it. Just go back over it. I have the chart up here. Just look at it, be able to say, alright, so it's going to be pupating around day 14. When it's hatch on, it'll probably be capped around day 14. So it'd be fine to take it out on day 14 and put it in an incubator, or take it and put it in one of your mating nukes, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the future if you don't know what mating nukes are. So you just want to make sure you go over some of those things so you know what days you need to be taking your queen cells out, because you don't take them out before day 14, maybe even day 16. If you are maybe out of town, and I can see where that would be an issue, that's why you got to make sure that you are in town, or make sure you are around your bees so you can be able to go to your bee yard and do something with those cells and not discard them and not have a reason for them. Because what will happen, and this is something that is not good, is if you have these cells hatch out after day 16, then you'll have the case where probably one queen will hatch and the others haven't yet. That virgin queen will go around and kill all your others, and it will be a devastating loss for you as a beekeeper or as a queen rearer. And that would be not a good situation to be in. Why? Because all your other cells got killed by that one queen that you could have used for something else, whether it be you want to sell them, or maybe you had plans to take those queens and put them in a split, and now you don't have any queens and you have to regraft, or you may have to buy new queens, and sometimes that can ruin what you have planned, and a lot of times that can happen. It happens, so you got to be prepared for that. So you got to be prepared for if that happens, so you have a plan B. Plan B for me probably be order a couple queens and hope they come in the next couple days. So the next thing I want to talk about real quick is the stages of raising queens. Now there's a lot of different methods and different things you can do to raise queens, but I'm going to start out with the basic one. And you don't want to do an overmediate one if you're a beginner. If you are a beginner queen rearer, or you're a beekeeper getting into queen rearing, and look, I'm not a professional, so these are things that are simple to me, and these are things that I have studied on hand about it. So I have that information, and I've also raised queens before, and I know how it goes. And I've done these methods before, and the easiest one for me and the easiest one for beginners, in my opinion, is the starter/finisher. You don't have to worry about making a starter and then worrying about the 48-hour mark and putting them in a finisher and having all these bees. But no, you don't have to do that. So number one, you do got a plan. So everything I said, you got to be able to figure out what you're going to do. If you don't have a plan and you're just going out there and doing things, you're not being intentional about it. You don't have a plan, and then that's going to set you up for, not a good case in the future. So number one, you do got to make sure you know what you're going to do with those queen cells. I think that's the biggest thing. If you're going to be raising queens, you got to make sure you know what you're going to be doing with those queen cells. So number one, what are you going to do with the queen cells? So what I do with them, I'd probably put them in a split or put them in a mating nuke, and I'm going to sell them. Or I'm going to give them to a friend as a virgin queen, or I'm going to sell them, or I'm going to do a giveaway or something. Or I'm going to put them in a mating nuke, like I said earlier. Whatever it is, you got to know what you're going to do with those queen cells. I just want to make that perfectly clear for any beekeeper who's thinking about starting to raise queens to know that. So let's go on and get into the starter/finisher. So number one, what you want to do is get a nuke. And this is what you use. You use a 5-frame nuke. And the reason why you use a 5-frame nuke is this is the best way to do it. And what you'll do is you'll take a lot of nurse bees. You want young bees in that starter/finisher to be able to feed that larva, because the nurse bees are the one who feed the larva. If you guys remember some of the basic beekeeping knowledge, is the nurse bees are the one who does that feeding. It's not workers, the older bees, what I mean, the ones that foragers or the ones who guard, those bees do not feed the larva. So a lot of beekeepers will get mistaken on that. Sometimes, in some cases, if those workers, those foragers, come at a point where they need to be a nurse bee, they will, but they're not really effective and they're not the best nurse bee. But the nurse bees are the ones, the younger ones. After they clean their cell and do a couple things around the house in their beehive for a couple days, they'll become a nurse bee and start taking care of larvae And they'll also take care of the queen. You'll see them feeding the queen too. They'll do that too. And you want a lot of nurse bees for that specific reason. And what you'll do, you'll take a brood frame, because the brood frame slash larva frame, those are the frames that are going to have a lot of those nurse bees on it. You'll shake about, I'd say, 3 to 5 frames of bees. And what you'll do, you'll take probably some pollen, honey, and you also want to set a lot of good bit of pollen in there too. You know why you want pollen? So then the bees can use that pollen along with some different moistures or some different additives for the royal jelly, because they have to have that pollen in the hive, because that's what they use to make royal jelly, along with some other honey and nectar and some different things that they use to make the royal jelly. And a lot of beekeepers think that the royal jelly is in the frame like pollen is, but no, it's just something that they make in their bodies. It's something kind of how they do it, and they make it on hand when they need it, and that's how they really do it. And what you'll do is then you'll have your pollen, you'll have your honey in there if you want to make sure they have a good rich protein, because those nurse bees are probably going to be somewhat hungry for protein after they're doing all that work trying to make wax. And you also want to make sure you have a good bit of, you know, bees, nurse bees, because nurse bees also do make wax too, so they'll do that too. And then, but when you do that, then you'll go back to your hive, or to your another hive, whatever you want to do. And if you want to, just it really depends on what hive you have, what genetics you want to breed off. And that's the next thing you got to figure out. What genetics do I want to carry on? Now, a lot of the genetics, as we know, comes from drones. But half of the genetics come from the queen that laid that worker egg that they fed royal jelly. And that's something I did forget to mention in the cycle of the queens, is that whenever they want to raise queens in that emergency case or the swarm case, they have to feed that worker larva. That's what it is originally, royal jelly. That turns it into a queen, which is still a female. And what you'll do is you'll take whatever breeder hive. A lot of times beekeepers have specific breeder hives, breeder queens that they graft from. You'll take the frame of about 3-day-old larva. You'll take it to wherever you want to graft at. It'd probably be good for a shady area so you can work good. You want to take, you know, this is what I do, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I've done. I take a headlamp, I strap it around my head, and I'll look down, and I'll take my grafting tool, and I'll take the grafts out and put them in the cups, the queen cups. And they're just these little plastic cups that go on a bar, and then you put them on the frame. And then what you'll do it slowly. It'll probably take about 30 minutes. You don't want to rush through it. If you rush through it, then you'll get probably that bad batch, and you don't want that. You want a good batch, but that also takes time, so don't over-rush yourself. Don't rush yourself to the point where it probably won't be a good case. You just gotta settle down. You just got to not rush yourself into being this best queen breeder, because it will happen. But over time, like I said, that is skill. That's also the art of raising queens and being able to have that knowledge and that hands-on experience. But I'm also getting off track, so let's get back on to the point. So next, what you'll do is you'll take your frame of your grafts, and what I do is I'll keep it upright the way you always have it. And what you'll do is you'll slowly take it over and then put it in your hive. And whenever you do graft, and we'll go back to the grafting part, you want to do it slowly. You want to take your little end piece of your grafting tool and easily gentle it up. Because if you don't and you flip it, then you flip it over on its other side, and then you actually choke it, because that's the side that that little larva breathes out of, right? If you flip it over, then that larva will probably die, and the bees will discard it, and they won't be able to use it. That's why you also got to be careful for that reason. So when you do it, that's why you got to gently do it, slowly do it. So the next thing you'll do is you'll take it out to the beer, like I mentioned earlier, just a second ago, and you'll put it in the hive. And this starter slash finisher is going to start it and it's going to finish it. So you really don't got to do anything. But what you do want to do, and this is what I do suggest you do, I don't think it hurts to do it, and this is what I instruct some beekeepers to do, and that's what I really instruct all beekeepers to do if you're going to be raising queens, especially beginner, queen rearers. And what you'll do is you'll come back about 48 hours later and look at your graphs. And what you'll usually see out of these graphs, they won't be capped. Of course they won't, because it's only been 48 hours. What you do, you'll open it up, be gentle. Whenever you pull up the frame, you don't want to just jerk it out of the hive, because that may damage the cells. But what you want to do is you want to gently lift up your graphs and see what you have. See if you have a couple of them. Maybe you did 10, maybe you have 5, maybe you have 4. That's fine. No matter how many you have, just be able to look at it. Alright, next thing you'll do, you put it back in, close it up. I mean, this is really where a lot of times this is the boring part that you have to do, but it's also not the boring part, because while you wait for the queens, you got to be able to start making splits if you want to put these queen cells in splits, or if you want to make mating nukes. So you got to be able to do some things, and we'll talk about that too. And then the next thing you'll do, you'll wait about, I'd say, this is just what I'd say, about 12 days. 12 to 10 days. Come back and make sure they're capped. You don't want to take them if they're not capped. You want to make sure that they're fully capped. So on day 14, you need to make sure you have a calendar. Day 13 through, I'd say no later than early day 15. But I'd say day 14. That would be the best day. You'll take those cells and you'll put them either in a split that you've done before you took those cells out, so they have time to know that they're queenless, and you can put those cells in. Or number 2, you can put them in a mating nuke. And now I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. This is something that you're probably there thinking. Why in the world, why would you even try to raise these graphs, these queens that we're doing, raising queens, and put them in a nuke that you could just buy a queen, or maybe even just buy a cell from somebody else, or you could just let them raise their own queen? Why are we doing this? Well, the main reason I think you should do this is you also carry on your traits. You also carry on some of your genetics. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the big 50% of the queen's genetics that will come out to the worker bee once they lay their eggs will come from the sperm, the drone. The drone sperm, whenever they mate, go on their mating flight for about 2 weeks. After, all that stuff happens, whenever you put the cell in your, whether it be nuke or a mating nuke, you'll wait about 2 weeks, like I said, and they'll mate, and then that's whenever you'll carry on half, most likely 50 to 40% of the genetics that were in that larva that you grafted. So it really goes back to that one specific time where you grafted out of that egg, or I mean that larva, that 3 to 4 day old larva. That's probably the best age of larva that you want to graft. Like I said earlier, we mentioned it earlier. If you didn't hear, make sure to go back and watch the whole video through. This is very important information that I think is really important for beekeepers to understand and maybe listen to. Maybe you're learning something out of this video. I hope so. But really, that's all that there is to it. And there's a lot of other things that you do need to, look into, whether it be other methods. There also is a method where you can use a double screen board. I ain't going to go into that today because that would be longer of a video than it is already. This is probably a 20-minute video. And I don't want to make it any longer because, it's just too much information in one video. But what I'll do, and these will be more future videos, I'll make this time for queen rearing because that's what we're getting ready for. And a lot of beekeepers don't know, and I'll answer this question, a big question. But a lot of beekeepers ask me, and this is going to be the question to end it off here, is, am I going to be raising queens this year? And what are my expectations? And everybody has expectations. Everybody has their feeling that, oh, we can do anything and this will be good. And yeah, I have expectations. But I don't have big expectations for my queens. And you also want to have confidence in yourself. I think you have to have confidence in yourself to be able to start raising queens. But what you don't want to do And what you also do want to do is, to, like I said earlier, raise 10 queens and expect 5 queens. Expect about a 50% take. And if it's lower than that, sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's just because that was your first graft, or maybe it was your 5th graft. And sometimes that happens. It happens all the time. And that's the big reason why beekeepers quit raising queens, because they didn't get a good percentage take. And the reason why is because, like I just said, it just frustrates people. It disappoints them if they didn't get their expectations, to the point where they wanted them to be. And that's why I go back to this one specific thing. And I think everybody needs to think about this, is that there is no rush to be this big queen breeder. First thing you need to do is build the confidence in yourself to, alright, even though I didn't get a good percentage take, I'm going to carry on with this queen rearing journey and get to the point where I will be a better grafter in the near future, and work to be there. And work hard to be there. Whether it be learning from books, or learning and being able to do those things hands-on. Because you learn a lot of different things whenever you raise queens hands-on. Whether it be failures or mistakes that you do in queen rearing. Because you learn from those, and you'll get to a point where you learn from those mistakes, and then you can go back into the future and you'll say, alright, there was one time where I didn't really do it correct, now I can do it correct now, and I know what not to do. And I also know what to do because I have learned from this hands-on. And that's the really big, good pro from learning hands-on. You get to learn different things, and you also get to do different things. So maybe if something didn't work for you, whether it be a different method, that's a lot of times what happens. A method doesn't work correctly for you. Then you can go back to, whenever that method didn't work for you, whenever you get into the future to a different time and you need to set up a new method, think, alright, this method didn't work for me. Let me try something different. And don't be hesitant, or don't be nervous to try something new. Try something new if you need to. Right? I think that rhymed. But anyway, just be able to learn from something new. Try things new that you haven't. And learn from those mistakes. And maybe learn from those things that didn't work for you. Learn from the successes that you've had. That's what I do. I learn from my successes. I've learned from my mistakes I've made. Everybody makes mistakes. You can't go back and change them. I've mentioned that before, and I go over that all the time. But that's something important if you want to be successful in the future. And that's something that you have to think about if you want to be successful in the future. And one of those things about being successful in the future is sticking with it. If you don't stick with it, you'll never know if you were successful, right? You don't know what's going to happen in the future. So why not just stick with it and keep grinding? You get to a point where you may be successful in the future. Not that you're not successful now, but you'll gain more information. You'll be a little bit more knowledgeable on the subjects that, whether it be methods, whether it be grafting, you'll be a little bit more persistent, or maybe a little bit more consistent on your different things. Consistency, a lot of times beekeepers like that. And look, if you want consistency, just stick with it. Just stick with raising queens. Don't expect this big thing right on front, because that's what a lot of times drives people away from raising queens. And that's the art of raising queens, is really sticking with it to learn the skills of raising queens. And I hope this video is some kind of a help to you. We talked a little bit about raising queens, some of the steps it takes. I use the starter/finisher method. It works for me. I've used it before. You want to make sure you have a full packed nuke to be able to do it. You don't want a small one. You want a packed full box of bees, nurse bees, like we mentioned earlier. And that's really a good method to use. Starter/finisher. I think that's a really good method to use if you're a beginner beekeeper or you're a beginner raising queens. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you found some kind of information, go on and click the thumbs up video. And like I said, stay tuned for future videos. We'll be talking about more methods. And also link some videos in the description below that I've mentioned before. There was a video I mentioned about one specific method. It was a very cool method. And it was a method that I think was a really good method that was described by Greg Burns. But I described it in my own way. I'll link it right here. Go on and watch that video right now. Maybe learn something from it. It's something that an unheard of method. And when you go watch that video, you'll know why. Go on and click that video, and we'll catch you guys on the next beekeeping video. Take care, everyone.